So next up for our last session of this event, we're going to talk about how do you use data to build ethical and transparent AI for building trust of the humans that you interact with. I reframed it a little bit, but and to do this, we're going to have Eric Hirschhorn, the Chief Data Officer from Bank of New York Mellon, Teza. I'm sorry, I'm not going to try and butcher your last name. The Chief Information Security Officer from ChargePoint, Raj, the President of Data Services from Mastercard, and Sears, the Head of Enterprise Technology from Mass Mutual. And it's going to be moderated by Oksana again from Sputnik ATX. Why don't you guys come on up?
All right, here we go. So first of all, thank you for sticking and being present at the very last panel of this amazing conference. As a reward, as someone who's from Austin, I'm going to share some awesome tricks for the Austin airport, like what you could do and eat there, so that before you catch your flight. I think we left one of the most important dialogues for last, because we've talked a little bit about what we do with AI. We talked a lot about what happens within AI. I think this panel will happen a lot with for whom we are doing that. I think at the core of the dialogue, let's not forget that at the center of AI is we are co-creating whatever we're discovering with the consumers we're serving. And I think it's a total treat because on stage with me, this dialogue is going to be fun and easy and insightful because I have deep thinkers, proven leaders that are also fun and easy to talk to. So I think you're going to enjoy this. This is going to be super fun. And let me kick it off by there is always a tug of war, and in this case, what is the tug of war? What is the conflict you see? Convenience of personalization versus a loss of privacy. Like, I want just to kick it off. Like, what do you see in your organization as how this manifests itself?
You know, I'm happy to go first. So, to me, it's not a tug of war. It is both. Yeah. Right? As a consumer, I want personalization, I want value propositions, I want experiences. But at the same time, I also want privacy, I want security, I want to control my data. So we don't think of it as a tug of war. We think of it as, you know, two conditions that must also be valid together. You have to innovate and you have to create and do things, but you have to do it in a responsible way, a principled way. Trust is important. Yeah. So it's both.
Yeah. So it's always
an and. It's not a versus.
It's an and. It's an and.
It's an and.
Yeah. Okay. I get it.
Yeah, I can go next. And the way I see it, you know, very close to personalization is great. How much am I willing to trade off my privacy for that? What I see definitely happening is the role of data aggregators and data brokers in the future. When you swipe your card, every data aggregator out there knows that how much are they going to use it to personalize products or information for you. There's definitely, you know, I bring in my paranoia as a CISO, of course, to this conversation, so it'll be interesting.
You know, just to add to that, you talked about trust. You know, for us, you know, we're a massive custodian, $45 trillion of assets under custody, and it's a slightly different model for us. We try and establish what trust is with our clients at inception when we start to do business with them and what they're comfortable with. Some of our customers want us to look at information through the business they do with us, and others prefer that we don't. And we're very clear about whose data is whom and what we're allowed belongs to whom and what we're allowed to do with it. And you know, that kind of has a certain characteristic of us being able to you know, process information and give it back to our customers to make them better operators. So it's a slightly different lens for us because we can't, you know, if you're Twitter, right? When you clicked on the button, it said Twitter owns all the information you have. When you're Bank of New York Mellon, it's very, very deliberate what information is ours, what information are our customers, and which information we share. So getting that personalization versus privacy thing correct is the lifeblood of the company.
Yeah, I think to round things out, I'd echo a lot of the comments. Actually, you just said, as a life insurance company that's been around for nearly 175 years, trust is at the core of what we do. And it's what consumers and policyholders really expect of a firm like ours. So we think about it in terms of first preserving and winning trust from new policyholders, certainly respecting privacy, And then I think after we felt like we've satisfied those from a policyholder perspective, we'll start to think about personalization in the context of a financial plan and long-term planning for protection.
Yeah, great answers, thank you. And yet, I think just to kind of keep this conversation, when you ask consumers right now, and I think we are just at the very beginning in prepping for the CDP.com is a study, more than 80% of consumers are concerned about companies mismanaging their data as they deploy AI. So one thing is to do the right things, and other things is to have the right structure of the checks and balances and communicate it clearly to your consumers. Could we talk a little bit about how that manifests itself?
Yeah, I can maybe go first here. I think you hit the nail on the head. There is a lot of concern, and I think it's certainly warranted as a consumer myself, and I'm sure as the audience feels similarly. Checks and balances are important. I think robust governance, right, making sure everybody that's going to use, whether it's data or AI, understands really clearly what are the conditions by which I can use this type of information or use a particular algorithm to deliver an outcome for a customer is really important. Monitoring systems to make sure that once that framework and decision-making framework has been created can actually be tracked through time, and you can take corrective actions where you need it is another big one for us.
Yeah. You know, I would agree with what you said. We approach it from a principle-oriented way. It's principles, controls, and governance, as I think about it. So we're all consumers. So we have consumer data principles where, as a consumer, I should own my data, I should control it, I should decide who I give it to, and then whoever I give it to needs to respect that and make sure they maintain privacy and security. So our data responsibility principles govern a lot of what we do. Mm-hmm. And then in our controls and governance, I think you said some of this too, we have things that are similar where we train our data scientists to think about the use cases, make sure they're human-centric, they're reasonable, make sure that we have testing of models as they built, as they introduced over time for drift, for bias, et cetera. We have, an AI council that monitors a lot of this and puts all the policies and procedures around it, and is also a sort of a decision-making body when there's a conflict. And by the way, it has our CISO, it has our chief privacy officer on it, our chief data officer on it, as well as our head of AI. Mm-hmm. So you really need to be principled, and even our product development processes. We think about privacy by design, security by design, data minimization. Mm-hmm. It should only use the data it needs. Mm-hmm. So all of these principles, controls, governance is what gives you the confidence, a greater level of confidence that you're innovating in the right way.
I love that we have a very similar concept of an AI council, and whether it's legal representation, ethical, CDO, head of engineering, and we've tried to be a very similar kind of thought process about being very deliberate. And even when we think about where the data is going to reside, some of our customers have a value system that says we want it to reside in this jurisdiction, or maybe there's legal issues around particular jurisdictions. And once you get that data set, the metadata around the information you want to model in place, you've then given those councils or whatever construct you use, you give them guardrails. And so they can act on decisions instead of acting on foundational concepts. So we've codified the foundational concepts. Where's the information? What's our ethics framework? What are our policies and governance models? And then we let that group disposition priorities for the enterprise and for our customers. So it feels like it's a very, very similar overlay. We've actually exposed a lot of that workings to our customers, because we want them actually to commission AI work for us. So, we're doing things for ourselves, predictive analytics, but then we have customers who come and say, hey, can you please profile some information, and can you predict the next trade that's going to fail? Or, what would happen under given economic scenarios? So it's a very similar process, I think.
Yeah, just to close it off, the way ChargePoint works is we are part of the transportation infrastructure. So for us, there's definitely this aspect of how do we make sure the consumer is aware that when they show up with their electric vehicle at the station, the charger is actually working. And this could be across any charging network. They could be using us, they could be using somebody else, primarily using their vehicles, right? So it's not just parts of what others have highlighted. We have an internal counsel, but also kind of elevating there where we have our ecosystem of partners be part of it is very important. That's where the standardization is critical for us, where everybody says, this is how we're going to transmit the data. This is how we're going to be predictively telling you whether this is working or not. We don't want somebody stuck on I-5 with no battery or something like that. So definitely there's a lot of work that AI can do in terms of delivering better consumer services.
Mm-hmm. Like one of the ways to make consumers be less suspicious of how you use AI is immediately put the data in AI to serve their business well. So I want to direct it to Raj, but obviously ask everyone else to comment, because I know from lots of reading experience, Mastercard is a total category leader in right away placing the data at the fingertips of their customers so that they could use the data to make better business decisions. Tell us more about that, please.
Yeah, so thank you, by the way, for the recognition. Appreciate that. We have AI and data-driven solutions embedded across the firm in a lot of what we do. So I'll start with, Mastercard is a network, right? We complete payments transactions. And if you think about it, we switch about 125 billion transactions a year. So and we do it in real time. So when you use a card and you tap it or swipe it or, or insert it in contactless, whatever you use, instantaneously you're able to make that purchase. Mm-hmm. Now, as soon as you think about that, you have to also remember that you have to control fraud. Mm-hmm. So we've deployed AI into our network. And I think over the last 3 years, we've stopped about $35 billion of fraud. So it starts there. Mm-hmm. And then it goes into, we're a B2B2C business. So we work with customers to help them run their businesses using smarter decisions, better outcomes, and also engage better with their consumers. Mm-hmm. So there we have a variety of different solutions, all of which have AI embedded in them. So things like, examples would be, we work with customers and their portfolios to find insights, actions in real time. We help, whether it's a retailer or a bank, figure out, how do you optimize your branch network? How do you evolve it? How do you transform it, make it digital and physical? How do you do staffing models? Offers that you might tee up, whether that's an offer to buy something, a discount, how do you do it in a way that it's really valuable to a consumer, but at the same time, it creates value for the customer, mm-hmm. right? And in doing that, there's AI that we use with our customers to do things like the ability to forecast, because forecast accuracy in all our businesses, in every industry sector is important, or scoring suppliers for risk, mm-hmm. understanding where the embedded risks are in terms of, whether it's environmental or modern slavery, or do they pay their small businesses on time. So we have a variety of different products. Two examples. One is test and learn that does massively parallel experimentation. So you can quickly double down and get to the one that works. Yeah. But in doing that, you've got to make sure there's no bias. And there's a lot of AI embedded in the testing and the bias. Dynamic Yield, which is a personalization platform we have, where you can actually tailor to an individual, but in a privacy and security protected way, again, using a lot of AI, right? But at the end of the day, the way I'll summarize it is by saying we've talked about AI across all of Mastercard. But at the end of the day, it's the hundreds of data scientists we have globally, the hundreds of engineers we have globally that work on this. It's the humans that matter. Because coming back to our earlier conversation, they're the ones that have to build these things and innovate. Mm-hmm. And with the guardrails, with the governance, et cetera, make it happen. And so it really comes down to it's human-centric at the end of the day.
Anything to add from the panel in terms of what you see in your companies?
I don't know that I could add to that. I mean, that was great.
Yeah. I want to tag along the bias, because I think MasterCard and bias, I think all again, I started with Raj, because I came across this terrific article in Fortune. It was very short, but very surprising, where MasterCard actually uses a game to eliminate bias in hiring the very data scientists and probably a lot of other people. Could you tell us more? That's actually very wicked and innovative, play a game to get hired.
Yes, so we use AI across a lot of our functions, right? And bias testing is something we believe in inclusion fundamentally. So making sure we take bias out of everything is important. And so the one you're talking about is in recruiting. We also have it, for example, we have a platform called Unlocked for roles and for short-term projects. Mm-hmm. So employees can be exposed to a project or apply for a different role. And why is that important? Because normally, talking about bias and equity, right? you tapped on the shoulder or somebody comes and asks you to do something. This is a platform where we tee up all the opportunities, they're publicly listed, but it also tees up things that I should probably be thinking about doing and tees it up to me as an option, which means we're encouraging, it's more, it's more inclusive in teeing up opportunities to employees. We also work with partners on biases and bias testing. So a good example would be we work with Howard University, and there the focus is on AI-driven credit risk modeling. How do you remove racial bias? How do you make sure you minimize it or ideally remove it as best as you can? So there's a lot that we do across. It's not just in the products and services and serving our customers, but also in what we do within Mastercard and what we do in our, we're a company that does well and does good. So what do we do in terms of impacting the world around us?
Seriously, I want to have you comment on that as well, and maybe from the perspective of, like, models are just good as the data that comes in, and like this dialogue is about the data. And so when you're dealing with people, I might go out, maybe not. When you deal with the people that may have been traditionally missed or yet not as deeply engaged with an industry like insurance industry, like how do you not discriminate against them inadvertently because the model is flawed or the data the model draws on is flawed?
Yeah, I think that this is a big question, and certainly one that's been important and continues to be very important to MassMutual as we deploy these kinds of capabilities. I always go back to you do need a pretty consistent and structured set of processes and governance frameworks to drive consistent decision making at scale, across a large enterprise. So whether that's having a really consistent model development life cycle, whether you're going to develop a model internally or use a third party, having a step-by-step process where you deliberately investigate those questions and make strategic decisions around whether or not you can correct them, whether or not you can tolerate them, and ultimately figure out if you want to move forward. So applying that kind of thinking when you're developing these systems, particularly when you're investigating the data sets that you're going to use to actually build these things out is a big one. And then I think more importantly, right, the world changes. So what might be a bias today and something that was corrected as part of the process might turn into something new in the future. So you do need some pretty careful monitoring processes in place. Those can be automated with some measurable outcomes. You can put those into a framework. And then I also think in an industry like ours, we do practice things like random holdouts. Right, so we'll actually randomly sample from decisions that we're making in an automated AI perspective, and actually go back and do a retro and make sure that to the extent that we're concerned about bias or consistency in decision making, we're actually going back and measuring for that and retraining models and things.
That feels like a very good old world tool to control the hallucination and other things that the models, as they're learning, they're still in their nascency, so they're going to make mistakes. Very interesting. Teza, I want to lead this question with you because one of the reasons consumers are leery of what AI could do, we all have read about the massive data leaks and what that done to the exposure of privacy, and like literally not a quarter goes by where one of the companies is being caught in the middle of this scandal. With AI, obviously, there are a lot more connections. There's a lot more liability. Plus, the bad guys are really adept at using AI as well to break into the system. So given your role, what are the top 5 concerns you have?
So something that phishing is one of the easiest things to do in cybersecurity. All you have to do is send out, I'm the Prince of Nigeria for a long time, and somebody is going to click on that link, and you're going to that's your payday. AI, some of the newer phishing attacks that we're seeing is way beyond that basic levels. They customize it. They know your background. They know your family. They know the folks that you work with, and they can kind of tune it to make it sound very legit. And they do this not by directly hacking your system, but they would hack a small vendor that you work with who's probably based out of some other country, right? So they have, that's been very interesting. I think we'll see a massive increase in some of that AI-generated phishing. This could be through phone calls that you receive, voicemails, emails. So that's going to be interesting, for sure.
Villains are customizing just as the good guys are.
Yes, it's going to be like the marketing. So it's that is something that definitely worries me. The second piece is historically here, my previous organizations, where data was there, but it was still coveted, where data scientists would work on a lot of this. Now I have my account exec who would paste a Word document into a tool to summarize it for them, right? So there's definitely that sphere of how the data, everybody has this tool, which is awesome, which is great, but how it can be exploited, or you're opening up new doors to be exploited. So that definitely is something that we're wary of. You could do it on your phone, on any kind of compute device that you have. So it's definitely an interesting space to look at.
Very interesting answer. Any additions, concerns that you guys see that your organizations are grappling with as it relates to security of the data?
I think just to feed off of Teza's comment, I think one of the coastlines of risk we see is third-party risk. And we spend a lot of time making sure that our vendors and their vendors have the same value system that we have. Because you can be really good at what you can see, but if you just rely on all the partners that we all, many of us know and love, and you don't investigate what partners they use and so on and so forth, you've got vulnerabilities there. So we spend a lot of time on third-party risk.
Yeah, third-party risk, that's a great point. One of the things that I personally always confused about, English is not my first language, to understanding legalese and the formalese and the fine print that comes and accompanies a lot of the use of the financial services is still mind-boggling to me. I pick lawyers not by just how good they are, but how clear they are, as in can they speak in English and not legalese. And I could only imagine how difficult it is for average consumers. The complexity increases and we add more pages of fine print. What can be done better to provide more clarity to people in a plainer and maybe simpler words as to what's happening with their data?
Yeah, I think straightforward, transparent communication around the conditions by which the data that somebody is going to give us is going to be used, and how that's going to influence their experience is really important. And I think as things get more complex, supplementing transparent communication with digital tools and things that enable somebody to interpret how some of these things impact their outcomes, right, and their ability to get different kinds of products and experiences are another thing that we've explored and had some pretty good success with.
Yeah, and I would say definitely, it starts with what we do within each of our companies. So their transparency, being clear, being principled is very important. So I would agree with that. And I'd say the other dimension is externally advocating, advocacy work as well as compliance with I'm talking about policymakers, regulators that are trying to make sure that the ecosystem complies. It's not just the individual companies that have the right values and the right principles, but all the participants comply. So also thinking through that and working with them and then adhering to the standards that are set, I think is important.
I think also along with that, our drive to automate, if you think about any of us as large multinationals, we write thousands of contracts a day, a month, a year, whatever your metric is. And, historically, those have been snowflakes. Contracts are negotiated by human beings, and we like to customize language, and you could go into that for an hour. We found that a lot of what we need to do going forward is eliminate snowflakes, is come up with standard clauses that our customers are comfortable with, and also give us automated ways to govern the information based on those standard clauses. So we see kind of not longer contracts going forward. We see more standardization, and then our ability to implement the products and services within those contracts in a governed way based on that standardization. And that's something that's somewhat freeing, because if you think of the legacy of what we have, whether it's PDFs or boxes of paper in a warehouse or something, a lot of us have these long-standing agreements. We've all been in business for decades, if not longer. And those snowflakes are risks. And so on a go-forward basis, standardizing how we think about things, how we communicate, and how we govern, we think is an amazing operational efficiency for ourselves and our customers.
Yeah. Absolutely. I'm going to stick with Eric because I think you mentioned something really interesting, kind of anchoring in BNY values, and Raj also talked about when you navigate a changing world, it is always a really great idea to stick to what are your values, what are the ultimate mission, what's at the core of your organization. So if you could maybe share how you've translated that value of trust into how you even configure your data sets and where AI operates and how it gets to operate, that I think was fascinating and very transferable to me. So if you could share that.
So thanks for the question. I think, as I mentioned, I think trust is our primary equation with our customers, and so is truth. So, in some of the conversations that we've seen over the last couple of days, hallucinations and things, we're looking more at predictive analytics, things that we think are risk reducing to how the world around us is operating in ways that will be helpful to our customers and how they do business. So, when we think about that, we think about, clean data sets, making sure we know whose data it is, making sure we know what kind of models we're running, but really leaning in on making sure we're looking at things like predictive analytics, automation of manual processes, where we see a lot of what we can bring AI to are the things that we haven't automated in the past. And so we see some great efficiencies there. Document processing, understanding those legacy documents we have, and using them to springboard into a more operationally efficient world. So that's been really, really well received for the way we operate, and the concept of truth, is something that we're also really focused on. So if you think about bias and drift and skew and things, we want to make sure that the advice that we're giving our customers or the information we're giving them back, there's no drift in that, kind of from a human perspective, not from a math perspective. So that kind of governs a little bit. I remember, I think it was Chitin who said yesterday, the blast radius is no negative customer impact. And that's a sentiment that we echo, and that comes up in our AI councils all the time. And that's also why we bring our customers into the conversation, because we want them as our business partners in the models we develop.
Very interesting. Anything to add from the panelists? How do you convey your company's values into how the AI is being deployed?
I can add to it a little bit. From the industry where I work, electric vehicles today are 4%. That's the penetration of electric vehicles, which has grown 4x over the last 3-4 years, right? And it's significantly accelerating in this decade, right? Where we expect the penetration to be 25% by the end of this decade. So how you build a charging network is extremely important. Who gets access to it? What zip codes are we setting these charging networks into? Because federally, we're going to spend $8 billion into building this whole infrastructure across the United States, and it's going back to our values of making charging accessible to everyone is kind of we tied back to make sure it's spread in a way across United States.
We have food deserts, adding charging deserts to it, right?
Exactly. Like how do we kind of integrate that into the societies in a more effective manner? That's irrespective of the zip codes or the vehicle buying patterns, things like that. How do we make it more equitable across? That has been one of our core metrics.
Yeah, and I think we're in a unique time right now, and I think MassMutual is a unique business in that it's actually owned by its customers and its policyholders. So we have a really organic, natural way of having a value system that's aligned with doing what's right for the people that are relying on us for their futures, and that permeates everything that we do, whether it's thinking about acquiring a data set, building a model, creating a digital experience. It goes well beyond just AI at this point. But I do think it is really important, particularly when you're kind of out at the edge of what's possible, right? With all these new things happening, relying on your values where there aren't clear-cut rules or straightforward ways in which to make decisions are a good form of guidance.
Yeah, and I would say it's very similar to my fellow panelists, because the values have to be articulated in clear ways, both to everyone who works at the company as well as to all your customers and to the world, right? Yeah. So I mentioned our data responsibility principles before. So to be very principled, to talk about transparency, responsibility, trust, what it means, who owns the data, how do you think about data, how do you think about your product development processes. All of these things, being principled about it is how you reinforce the values.
Yep. Great. This is such a fun conversation. And we are moving toward the end of it. Before we get to questions, I want to ask, because I'm talking and we're hearing from a group of AI experts, people who are deploying this, and it's interesting to me. What surprised you the most about how AI showed up in your personal and professional life? So we've talked about what it does to your company. What does it do to you when you show up at work or you show up at home, given everything you know?
So it's not new, right? It's been around for a long time. I mean, I think back when I was in graduate school many years ago, we were playing with neural networks and things like that. It's just evolved in terms of when you think about where computing has gone.
And it wasn't as convenient, and very few people could play with the neural network.
A long time ago, yeah. Right? But when you think about data quality, which some of the other folks talked about, when you think about it has evolved to a point where it's much more pervasive. Yeah. But it's been around a very long time in different forms of fashion, and so I think many of us have been working with it at work for a long time, and it's been components, whether it's visible or not, it's components of what you use and do. Yeah, it's pervasive in your personal life as well. Yeah, right.
I think for us, it's starting to change our day. We start to come in certain sectors and start to see anomaly detection models that have fired off that said, overnight we're used to seeing 600 million things happen, and a certain subset of those happened a little differently last night. Your deposit balance has moved or something more than its historic norm. And instead of having people dive into reams and reams of information, it's become more automated targeting systems, not to tell you what's wrong, but to tell you where to look. Yeah. And that's been really helpful. I think we've also used it to horizon scan, right? And start to say, well, you see various stress in financial markets. Well, we know what happened with an SVB or a Credit Suisse. But what are the secondary and tertiary effects? What have we seen in the past when something like that has happened? Sure, you know the first name, but what about the customers that you have that relied on the people that relied on the people that had an issue? And so, coming into work, we're starting to see more and more, how do you start your day? Let's go look at what happened last night and make sure it's not going to bite us, or we have some information that could be helping our clients, and we make sure we get it to them efficiently. So that's
very interesting.
Yeah, I think for me, one of the really fascinating things that's unique about where we are right now is really the confluence of all the different primitives that have been available in the past, but I would say not to the degree or the scale that they are now, right? We just heard Reddit say, hey, we have the world's most high quality, finely tuned natural language set of data that anyone's ever seen. That didn't exist, right, many years ago. Similarly, we've got, I think, a mindset in the consumer that's very digital first. So there's a willingness to use these kinds of tools in their everyday life. And historically, you wouldn't see that, right, in industries like financial services or healthcare or some of these other things where the cost of getting it wrong is very high. So the fact that all of those things now are coming together, and you've got a mindset that's focused on adopting these capabilities and using them the right way, I think tells me we've got a lot in store and a lot of change coming in the near term.
And I would agree with that. I would also say it's accelerating. Yeah. The pace of change is accelerating, which is exciting in terms of what it unlocks in terms of potential. But at the same time, it also means that you have to think extra hard about security, like you were talking about, extra hard about, biases and unforeseen impacts. Yeah. But the pace of change is accelerating. It is interesting.
And you need to kind of change your workforce around those changes, right? Yeah. I mean, we're seeing a lot of transformation of workforces, and also moving the bar. Just because we can run an experiment, what's the outcome? There's so many interesting ideas out there. And if you don't put them through that lens of what the outcome is, sometimes you get lost in the interesting in place of the important.
Yeah.
So true. Right. I guess we are moving to questions because we have a few minutes left. So very fascinating question. So synthetic data, do we use it for anything? If so, what's the safe use case? That's a very cool question, very nerdy. Who wants to tackle that?
Sure. So yes, we do look at synthetic data. Can't talk to you about all the use cases, but for example, one of them that we can talk to is we use it to train fraud models, as an example, where sometimes you can't train it on the actual data, but you can use a synthetic data set to train it.
Very cool.
We use synthetic data when we're trying to help some of our clients, and we want to show them an analysis about how something in the financial markets may impact them. We're not entitled to use their data in some cases. We don't want to, so we take synthetic portfolios and show them the impact, and then let them draw the conclusion about whether they want to contribute their information to that model. We have a very much of an opt-in approach to doing those types of analyses.
Yeah, we do similar things from a use case perspective. We also use synthetic data to kind of test edge cases, right, and just kind of validate quality and decision making under instances that you probably wouldn't see at a high frequency in the real world, but you obviously want some insurance that you're going to be able to deal with those consistently and safely.
A large part of our customer base are trying to electrify, like they were historically in gas vehicles, moving to electrification. So we kind of do a lot of modeling around what are the driving patterns. For example, electric school bus is used 2 hours in the whole day. It's just sitting in the garage. Beyond that, so we use a lot of synthetic data to predict where the infrastructure should be laid, what is the right use of their dollars or the grant money for the future. So definitely a lot of synthetic data is amazing. That's why,
The other question, we tackled it a little bit, but I think it's maybe worth going deeper. How do you avoid bias when profiling a customer, and what metrics should be tested?
Good question. I think for us, actually, there's maybe a meta question here, which is, what's the definition of bias actually in this particular question? Because arguably, there's certain instances where you want bias, right, towards a particular outcome. So we look at those things on a case-by-case basis, particularly use case-by-use case basis. And where certain types of bias, right, disparate impact, for example, is a great one where we care deeply about that, right? We'll make sure that we have the appropriate kinds of measures in place to figure out whether that's a risk that we're exposed to.
Yeah, very cool. And I think we're almost out of time to keep people fetching the planes correctly. Thank you guys so much. As promised, my 2 tips, Austin Airport actually has spectacular food. Some of our best, most famous restaurants have really great outposts, right post security. So I'm gonna give you 2 tips. The first is my personal favorite, which is a Salt Lake barbecue. Not only gonna have fantastic barbecue that you don't have to travel to the suburbs of Austin, though it's actually highly recommended when you have a chance to do that. You could have a great barbecue there, but also you could take a brisket that will elegantly wrapped for you, and you could take it home and treat your loved ones. If you're in the mood for tacos, peach tortilla, which is a fantastic fusion between Asian and Mexican, is also there, and it always surprises me. Those are my 2 personal favorites. And so safe travels, and come back to Austin. This had been a spectacular time. It was a treat to be your last panel. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.